everyone, welcome to The Zest, the official podcast of Orange Coast Magazine. I'm Chelsea Rainieri, and today's guest is the CEO at Neurologics, a cutting-edge technology company that offers brain mapping services that help to optimize the brain, and in some cases leads to an additional 15 functional IQ points regardless of your age. The company offers programs that are designed to aid in concussion and brain injury, cognitive decline and dementia, addiction and recovery, ADHD and learning differences, and child development. Thank you so much for being here today, Karen Odell-Barber.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to do it.
Of course. So to be honest, I didn't know too much about Neurologics until I started researching you, and what the company does is fascinating. So I'm so excited to dive in and learn even more.
Go for it. Go for it.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about brains.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, to start at the very beginning of your story, where did you grow up and what were you like as a kid?
Sure. I grew up all over the place. I was born during a hurricane in 3 feet of water in Nassau, Bahamas. And delivered by flashlight. My parents were kind of world travelers, and my dad was there putting in infrastructure in the Bahamas, and I was born then. And so, people ask me, did you become a crisis therapist because you are good in a jam? I've always been good in a jam. I was born into chaos, and the more difficult the cases, the more I'm drawn to them. And so I was the new kid. I moved a ton. In fact, I went to 3 different third grades. Right. Wow. And so my dad was an infrastructure engineer, and we traveled, when projects reached a critical point, and generally when there was a problem that needed to be solved, we arrived on the scene, sometimes for 6 months, sometimes for 4 months, sometimes for up to a year and a half. And then I went to high school in Las Vegas, just outside Las Vegas, Henderson. I went to undergrad at Arizona State. I did an international business certification at the London School of Economics. Between undergrad and grad school, I went to grad school at San Francisco State. And then I did my postgraduate work at Berkeley in addiction specifically.
Wow, that's so impressive. Well, you also, just to fast forward a bit, you worked at Belmont Hills Hospital, which is an 80-bed neuropsychiatric center. And you had several positions there, including chief operating officer. So can you talk a little bit about what this hospital was and what you learned there during your time?
Oh, sure. It was amazing. Look, I've always been drawn to super difficult cases, and that sort of gets me to how I stumbled across this technology. During my time at Belmont Hills, it was a private neuropsychiatric center in the Bay Area. And I was originally in grad school when I first started there. And it was such a great opportunity because I would learn about, bipolar disorder, and then I would see bipolar disorder in room 3. And I would learn about schizophrenia and then see pediatric schizophrenia in room 5. And I would learn about, all the various different kinds of personality disorders and see them all in 3 dimensions. And so it was absolutely an amazing way to cut my teeth in the field. And so it sort of incorporated learning by doing, right? Yeah. And I've always been interested in people that struggle. Your question before was, what was your life like as a kid? Pretty chaotic, I'll be honest. What was my life like as a kid? A lot of moving, British parents who expected a lot. When I was 15, I smashed my face and had to have my whole face rebuilt, snow tubing at Mount Charleston. Yep. So if you know anything about Las Vegas, there's a tiny, tiny ski resort, like about 45 minutes to an hour outside of town. And I was walking up with a big truck inner tube on New Year's Day when I was 15, and a kid came down with a toboggan and took out both my knees, like just boom, aimed for my knees. And there wasn't enough snow to cover this big rock that was right in front of me. And so I smashed my face, didn't have the ability to catch myself with my hands. And literally I went like this, and my nose was completely flat all the way across, nothing left. Right. And so, lost consciousness, whole thing. But the interesting part about that, and I'll circle it back to Belmont Hills and circle it back to brains, is that if you ask me, hey, Karen, did you, have you had your face reconstructed? Yes, I have. And my surgeon did a great job. And can't, honestly even tell that this nose has 0 bone in it, none. Right. But I would not have equated that to, do I have traumatic brain injury? I would have said no. And nobody ever asked me, and I never thought about it. And I, for sure, I lost consciousness in the back of the pickup. I was bleeding profusely. Of course, I had, major surgery with a couple of complications, but I would have not ever told you that I had any traumatic brain injury. Then fast forwarding to like my time at Belmont Hills, which coincided with graduate school. My very last semester of graduate school, I'm called in. I love testing. I love data, which is part of the reason I went to the London School of Economics. I'm a clinician who loves data, and we're kind of an unusual group, right? And so I love testing, and I put it right off till the end, thinking like, as soon as I open my private practice, I'm going to incorporate all forms of testing. And the professor calls me in and tells me that she says, hey, I got your results back on the Beery, which is in grad school, you have to administer all the tests and take them all yourself. Oh. And it's learning by doing, right? And San Francisco State is amazing. It was at that time, it was the number 3 school in the country. And they're wonderful about, you can't help somebody unless you've walked where they walk, and you can't administer a test unless you've taken the test yourself. And so, I take this battery of tests, and now she's calling me up to her desk, and I'm thinking like, this can't be good. I wonder what this is about. And she looks me straight in the face and says, you have a profound learning disability.
Whoa.
And she uses those words, disability, right? And I initially laughed, and I was like, no, lady, like not me. Like I'm the smart one, hey, I'm in whatever. Like, I don't know if you know, but hey, I'm the graduation speaker, right? And she took out a Post-it when they had those Post-its, when those existed, right? And she writes this scribble on this Post-it, and then she says to me, do you want to get an A in this class without taking the final? And I'm like, sure. Who doesn't want to do that, right? And then she said, I need you to go back to your school district over spring break, and I need you to track your records, because your learning disability, and she used that word, is so profound that this had to be identified in kindergarten. And unless your IQ is, and she wrote a number and shoved it into the desk, and she said, unless it's this high, you shouldn't have graduated from high school.
Oh my God, just give me chills.
Yeah. And so I thought so I talked to my parents, and I'm like, do you remember any kind of testing in kindergarten? And they're British people. They were not educated in America. And they're like, well, I don't know, just the usual kindergarten test. Like, I don't know. No, I don't think so. And so I go to the school district, and literally this is how long ago this was. They had microfiche. Okay. So like, it's like this plastic, set of records, and you have to find yours alphabetically. And anyway, sure enough, I find my records, and there it is. Yes, I was diagnosed with a profound learning disability in kindergarten. And so what that showed was that I have visual motor impairment, profound visual motor impairment. And so I dutifully, copy this off and take it back to the professor. And she goes, let me ask you some questions. Are you good at racket sports? And I go, no. And she says, well, what happens? I go, I don't swing till the ball's gone. And she's like, okay. And how are you at reading a map? And I go, I'm terrible. Like, she goes, how about a set of architectural plans? I can't do that. So she's like, how about navigating like the tube or the subway? And I go, well, I would have to practice that. Like, when I was living in London, I would write down what stop I needed to get off on, and then practice doing that task. Because if I got off where I didn't know where I was, I couldn't figure out my way home. Right. Oh. I never thought that was unusual. I don't know why. And so it was then and there, I thought like, wow, and sure enough, she wrote down like what my IQ had to be. And sure enough, it was high. Right. And so because my IQ was high, and in brains, we call that high cognitive reserve. And it means like you've got an IQ that's gifted. Right. And so I have this gifted IQ and a profound learning disability. And she used that word. Right. Wow. We now know that when I talk about learning challenges or differences, I never use the word disability, because I'm not disabled. right? And then
Right.
I also learned the term twice exceptional. And that means you have a gifted IQ and some learning challenges or differences, or in some people's terms, disabilities. And so, pretty in grad school, I started getting super interested in difficult cases and how people learn in brains, had some specific interests in really challenging things like eating disorders and addiction. And they don't teach you about those things in plain old graduate school, not enough to actually work with that population. Right. And so what I noticed was that while I worked at Belmont Hills, first, I worked my way up from the ground. Like I started as a mental health worker. And what that means is like an orderly, like a tech, really.
Oh, okay.
And then by the end of the time, I was running the facility. Right. And so, and I had amazing mentors who paved the way for me there. But I was always looking for something that we could align around. Like, for example, like if you go to the ER and you think you have a broken bone, what happens? They show you an x-ray and they go, you do or do not have a broken bone. They show you an image and they point to the image. And if there's a break, they show you exactly where that is. And I was looking for that in brains. And I was saying, why don't we have something that we can all align around when it comes to, when it comes to things that we label people with, like addiction, like bipolar disorder, like ADHD, like anxiety, like depression. These are all labels that humans apply because they are guessing.
No
That's
way.
it. Yeah, way. And so we have something it's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And when you are in graduate school, that is your Bible. And when you take your board exam, when you're done collecting all of your 3,000 hours, it is, a series of vignettes where you are supposed to label somebody with a label based upon what somebody tells you about the person. And I would have told you I'm good at that thing, right? Until I had this brain mapping at my disposal, I learned that I am wrong 50% of the time. 50%.
Really?
And that is industry wide. So somebody's saying, hey, your kid does or does not have ADHD. It is their best guess. And it's 50% likely to be wrong.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And so what we learned, or what we know, is that behavioral medicine is like an inexact science, right? And so it's, and I don't like that. I like data, right? And so for me, I'm looking for if I'm going to label something, especially a child, I've always specialized in populations 12 to 25. And so, yes, I've gone younger. I've seen people as young as 4 at Belmont Hills. And certainly I've seen geriatric patients. It was a wonderful place to cut my teeth again, because we saw people 4 years old to 84 years old. Right. And so the population I was always drawn to was 12 to 25 year olds. And so for me, if I'm going to tell you your kid has something, I want to point to something and say, and this is how I know. I don't just want to say, you should trust me because I'm a professional. Does that make sense?
Right. Totally.
So I love Belmont Hills, and that's where I got my ferocious appetite for, diagnostics. And I started during my vacations and on my own time, traveling both domestically and internationally, looking for, is there something that we could all align around and agree on what the problem is? Because what I saw was children and families coming back over and over and over again. And, I'm old enough that back then we would keep a kid in the hospital. Sometimes, an eating disordered girl, we would sometimes have for 5 months in the hospital.
Oh, wow. 5 months.
Yep. And they would bring in their bedspreads from home, and they'd decorate their rooms. And we had a teacher come in from the county, and the families would come every single day, and they would do multifamily therapy group on Saturdays. And those kids got better. Right. And so then this thing comes along in the 90s, right about the time that I'm there. Right. And that thing's called managed care. And so the length of stay went from 5 months to 90 days to 30 days. By the time I left, it was 23-hour bed.
No. Oh my.
Yeah.
How do they expect to be effective in 23 hours?
You're not. Right. And so So it became really necessary to know what the problem is and to be able to try to guide families towards some kind of a solution, right? And so for me, looking for that imaging tool was the first step to say, if I'm telling you your kid has something, and in order to be in the hospital, you have to label them with something big, right? And so the idea of that became like something I was relentless about. And 15 years ago, I stumbled across it with Neurologics.
Yeah. So can you talk a bit about what Neurologics is for our listeners who aren't familiar with it?
Yep. So Neurologics has two products. One of them is the most state-of-the-art brain mapping tool available anywhere, domestically or internationally. We are that tool that was developed by someone who'd worked in NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So it was developed by a NASA engineer and scientist who happened to have a unique background, kind of like my background is unique. And he looked at the brain in a completely and entirely different way. And so that tool is different than any other. You hear stuff like, you hear the term brain mapping, and 15 years ago, we were not talking about brains at all. We were not talking about brain mapping. We were not talking about neuroengineering. We were not talking about neurofeedback. We weren't talking about neuro anything, right? But now we're in the age of the brain, and the idea of that brains are incorporated and involved in behavioral medicine treatment, or just treatment in general, is we're certainly there now, where everybody thinks they know what a brain map is, right? And most brain maps, all of the brain maps except ours, look at the brain at rest. And so if you think about that, that's interesting. So they look at the brain while it is not thinking. And so if you want to understand how the brain works, you want to look at the brain while it is thinking. And you also want to look at it at the actual speed of thought. And we're the only company in the world that does that.
Interesting. So are you like, how is that? What can someone expect from that? Are they hooked up to something and they're taking a test, or?
Yep. And so this is one product, and then I'll tell you about neuroengineering, which is even more mind blowing. So, and the pen was intended, mind blowing. So there's something called QEEG, and that's in every emergency room in America. There's not an emergency room in America that does not have a QEEG, and that technology has been FDA registered and approved since the 1960s. And so if you go to any emergency room and you say, I'm going to have a QEEG, they would ask you, okay, open your eyes, close your eyes, turn your head to the side. And in 15 minutes, it would spit out a squiggly line filled piece of paper that would rule in or rule out whether you'd had a seizure in that 15-minute period. And that is what that collection mechanism is used for. And so what Neurologics does is use the same collection mechanism, plain old QEEG, with a software that's proprietary that actually captures the brain waves as you think at the actual speed of thought. And it incorporates all the paper instrument testing that we have used to label humans all at the same time. So it's totally state of the art, wherein, okay, we still do eyes open, eyes closed, baseline measurement. And that's looking at the brain while it's not thinking, right? You're not asking the brain to do anything. And then we start to put the brain through its paces, and everything from short-term memory, long-term memory, auditory processing. We look at over 12,000 domains of brain function. And there's an algorithm that takes you past the point of ordinary performance. So it doesn't matter if you are cognitively impaired or whether you're super gifted. It takes you past the point of ordinary performance. And then it looks at where your brain goes in default. And it looks at the brain neural networks. And then it's compared against very large databases. Believe it or not, Neurologics has the largest abnormal brain database in the world. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yep.
What do you mean by abnormal brain?
Abnormal, meaning anything with a label, right? And so, so a normative database would just be people with no psychiatric diagnosis, no depression, no anxiety, nothing, right?
Just oh my God, that exists.
It used to exist a lot more than it does now, right? But But yes, so the two largest normal databases are NIH, the National Institute for Health, and NYU. And they have the largest normal databases. And compared to that, we have the largest abnormal database. So we take all this data about your brain, and it's a 2-hour process, and we upload that information, and then it gets sorted and redacted. Redacted means we don't know it's your brain or my brain. It just says, 47-year-old woman, 32-year-old female, 16-year-old boy, 6-year-old boy. And it doesn't reveal any identifying information about the person whose brain it is. And then there's something called discriminate matching. And what that means is you're not 100% anything. No one is. You're either more of something than not. So for example, if you have something like schizophrenia, you have to have, it's called a discriminate match of 8 out of 10. And that means you're more bipolar than not. And so the only company that has the ability to do that discriminate matching at the speed of thought is Neurologics. And so the idea that, hey, okay, we look at total and global overall brain function, and then the map spits out, okay, here's where you are. And the part that really I loved was, and here's where we can get you to. And what that means is, let's say you have a normative, your brain is, you have a normal IQ. A normal full scale IQ is 100. We have across 23,000 unique brains been able to give every single human who's done optimization at least 15 functional IQ points. And what that means is the difference between 85, an IQ of 85 is considered disabled, impaired, unable to work or learn. An IQ of 100 is normal. Right?
Oh, it's not that far off.
Right?
Wow.
And so the difference between a 100 IQ is not a collegiate bound IQ. That is a trade school IQ. That's certainly like, hey, you can work, but you'll have great difficulty or struggle in college. And but 115 is a college IQ. Right? And 130 is a med school IQ or a graduate school IQ. Right? And so the gift of 15 functional IQ points forever, permanently, changes somebody's stars totally and completely. And so the brain map is awesome because it tells you exactly what's going on, and it explains it in words of one syllable. And you get to have 90 minutes of consultation with one of our doctors, and you can divide that up any way you want. You can have your child's teacher have 30 minutes. You can have the parents have 30 minutes. The child have 30 minutes. You can have, if you're an adult, if you're an adult athlete, you can have your coach have 30 minutes. You can have your trainer have 30 minutes. But it explains things really clearly in plain language and says, okay, look, like, here's what goes on with your brain. For me, I didn't do this until 10 years ago, even though I've been involved with the company for 15 years. And honestly, the interesting thing there was a D1 football player said to me, will I feel tired after I have my brain mapped? And I go, no, you won't. And he goes, well, how do you know, Karen? Have you done it yourself? And I felt totally called out. And I go, you know what? You're right. And I'm going to do it this weekend. And my excuse would have been, I thought my brain was good enough. And that was arrogant and wrong. Right. And so again, partially going back to my roots of you want to do the thing you're asking somebody else to do. He called me out, and I absolutely was like, okay, like this weekend I'm getting my own brain mapped. And I expected it to show the same thing that my, IQ testing showed multiple times. And that's not what happened. So what happened was, hey, when I had my own report of findings with the doctor, and I'd by this time I was 5 years in, so I'd seen probably close to 1,000 maps at the time. I noticed, there are 2 maps on the screen. Like, why are you showing me 2 maps? And he goes, the other one's a career NFL player, and your brain is worse.
Oh, no. Oh my God. That would scare me so bad.
It scared me so bad. And then he pointed to my damage. And guess where the biggest damage was? Right here, where I smashed my face snow tubing. I had huge damage to the frontal lobe. Right. And then I also had additional concussions here and here. And he goes, well, what is this? And I could remember that car accident, like car accident, jaws of life. Like, yeah, okay, I remember that.
Oh,
and he goes,
big,
what about this one? And I'm like, I could see it topographically. I could see the damage. And I was like, I don't know what that is. And the brain is so interesting. He's like, okay, close your eyes and put your hands right on the damage. Close your eyes. And he's like, and tell me what comes to mind. I got kicked in the head at a Tom Petty concert.
no
Right?
way.
Yeah, way in grad school,
What?
right?
Oh,
and
no.
I had the cheap seats because I couldn't afford to sit in chairs, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm on the lawn, and somebody's dancing around with Dr. Martens with steel toe, and she nails me right in the back of the head. And yeah, I saw stars, and like NFL players say, I had my bell rung for sure. I had my bell rung, and definitely I saw stars, and my ears rang, and the whole thing. And I rode the train back to my apartment in San Francisco, and I went to sleep that night, and I woke up 18 hours later.
Oh, no.
Which is like the hallmark of concussion, right? You lose consciousness and you don't wake up, right? And today I didn't go to the ER ever.
Yeah.
Like, right. But there it is. And so as I say, like, okay, well, how would you characterize my map? The doctor said, as a merciful traumatic brain injury. And I said, well, what's merciful about it? And he said, you don't have any auditory processing issues. And so I said, tell me some more about that. And he said, well, most NFL players or anyone with traumatic brain injury, you really notice that they have it because they take a long time to respond. And so if you ask an NFL player a question, there might be a period of silence that could be up to 30 seconds. And they look contemplative, like they're thinking hard about it, right? Nope, they just can't. If you ask them, because I have, and I've become super passionate about, NFL players, both active and retired, because I come into contact with them often and a lot, right? And if you ask them, like, you seem peaceful, or you seem, they go, no, Karen, like, I'm not a quiet person. I just can't retrieve the word. Like, I'm sitting there frantically thinking about how to respond, and I can't pull the word out that I need to be able to respond to you. So I look like I am calm and thinking, but I'm actually frantic because I'm looking for that word. And now you've moved on to the next topic, and I still can't pull out the word I need to respond to the last topic. Does that make sense?
So difficult. Yeah. Are you able to help through that?
I do not have that. Right. So, so meaning like, okay, the merciful nature is, I have traumatic brain injury, but I also don't appear to have traumatic brain injury. Right. And so if you looked at me and said, like, does this woman have profound learning differences in a traumatic brain injury? Most people would say no. And that is the reason I'm so outspoken about both, because both things are somewhat silent, right? So like, if someone has a learning difference, they don't have a t-shirt that says I have a learning difference. And if they're not in a public school, you might not even be aware that they have a learning difference, because they might not have any accommodations or any workarounds, right? And so, so from the beginning, of my both of those being part of my story, I just thought it was super important that I am transparent and say, like, #me too. Like, yes, I love people with TBI, and I am one of those people with TBI. And so you can't imagine how often that's come in handy with NFL players specifically. So I was at the draft in 2023. That'd be right. 2022 in Vegas at the NFL draft. And so I'm at this amazing draft party where, people have just been drafted. They're super happy. And it's like at this epic party at the Cosmopolitan. And this very seasoned NFL player is super scary. He's standing there with his arms folded and like very scary posture, just a massive person. And he said, and we started talking, and he looked me straight in the face and said, "Why do you care?" And I go, cause I have TBI. And then his arms unfolded, and he took a super deep sigh. And he goes, "Then you know." And he started to tell me his story.
Wow.
Right. And that story involved, like, he goes, "I can't read books anymore." And he's I put them on my nightstand, and I'm so curious and hungry for knowledge. And this is a man who went to the Naval Academy, who had, before Tua, he had the most famous on-field injury with the Raiders, where his leg was almost ripped off. And you ask any man who Napoleon McCallum is, they all know, right? And so anybody who went to the Naval Academy knows, and anybody who's ever followed the Raiders knows. And anybody who lives in Las Vegas knows, because he still lives in Vegas, right? So he said, look, I'm a curious learner. I'm a lifelong learner. I would put these books on my nightstand, and I would pick them up and flip through them, and I wouldn't be able to recall whether I'd ever read the chapter or not, even if I had a bookmark in there. And so it was like, and he's like, is there anything you could do for me? Because I'm so worried that, hey, I'm in my 50s. He was in his 50s at the time. And he's like, I'm so worried that I'm not going to know who my grandkids are when I have grandkids. And it was like that therein began his process of neuroengineering. And so that's the second product that we have. And the neuroengineering is married to the brain map, right? So every single thing starts with a map. Every single human's brain is totally unique. Mine doesn't look anything like his, even though we both have traumatic brain injury. Right. And so my neurotraining exercises, my neuroengineering exercises don't look anything like his, but they're delivered by computer, and they're 50-minute sessions, 50 minutes. And there's a human being guiding you through those sessions like a trainer does at the gym.
Oh, yeah.
So we've learned that over time, because I've made all the mistakes that every CEO makes, right? Yeah. We've learned that people show up when they're accountable. I'm much more likely to show up at the gym if somebody's there waiting for me than if I'm left to my own devices.
Right.
And so those neuroengineering sessions happen for something like TBI. They happen over a 4-month period, and there's a brain map that's compared against the baseline map every other month. And so, for example, in my case, there was my baseline map, during which I only remembered 58% of new material. That's it. So yeah, mortifying. Right. And so what did my short-term memory look like? It was shot. And it made total sense of the way that I got through grad school, the way that I got through undergrad. I injured my brain when I was 15. And so college came, I'd have to cram for an exam. I couldn't hold it. Like, my roommates would read sequentially and learn periodically over time. I would take no-dos or drink an energy drink or caffeinate myself up to the moon and shove every little thing into my brain, because I would know that by the time I took the test, it's gone. 58% of it, right?
Wow.
Only 58% stuck around. Sorry. So the point that, having the data made sense of my experience, but I also didn't realize how stressful that is.
Right.
If you can't remember something, right?
No, that sounds so stressful.
So stressful. And it happens to more people than you would possibly imagine. Right. And more kids than you'd possibly imagine. And so anxiety is kind of a secondary emotion, where you feel anxious because you can't something, right? You can't self-soothe. You can't, and there's so many reasons anxiety is there. And being able to go guess what? The reason you're anxious is you have an unresolved primitive reflex. I didn't even know what that meant. But guess what? It can be as simple as all babies are supposed to crawl before they walk. And if a baby doesn't crawl enough before they learn to walk, they don't resolve that primitive reflex that's in charge of crawling. And it can look like ADHD or anxiety or some sort of profound learning difference. It's as simple as that. Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, Karen, I could talk to you. I'm going to have you come back and do an entire episode just on anxiety.
I would love that. I'd love to talk all about anxiety.
OCD. I got diagnosed with OCD.
And OCD. I love to talk to you about it. They go together.
Yeah. And now I'm like, well, is it actually? But anyways, we'll come back for a part 2. But for people who are listening and I have to do this, I really want to do this. Where are you guys based? How can people find you?
Yeah. Well, we're based in Orange County, but we go to 48 states. And so we're the only places that you have to come to us in Orange County are Alaska and Hawaii. We don't fly out to Alaska and Hawaii, but our mappers are in 48 states across the country. Wherever someone is in the world, we go to them. and we can map them in their home or office, or you can come into our Newport Beach Assessment Center, which is at Fashion Island, 400 Newport Center Drive. Super close by, super easy.
Yeah.
Neurologics.com is our website, and that's neurologics.com. And you can, call one of our admissions team. I have an amazing team. Most of them are either parents of somebody who has been through the program or their former clients who just said, like, this is an amazing company. I have to join it myself. So
I love that. Well, we are coming to the end of our time, but before I let you go, I have 3 final questions for you that we call the Thoughtful 3. And I'm so excited for you to answer these. So after reviewing so many brain scans, what are some habits that you've observed in individuals with optimal brain health that others can adopt?
People with optimal brain health learn something new every day. They challenge themselves, like Napoleon, right? So learning something new, like looking for something new or different, adapting to new challenges. That's somebody who has good brain health. Somebody with good brain health has good eating habits. We could also talk about brain and the gut. I didn't understand. This is my fun fact. There is brain matter identical to this in your gut. Upon autopsy, you have 2 brains, this big one and the second brain, which is in your gut. I'm not a neuroscientist. I had no idea either. And when I found out, I thought, I bet I'm the only person who doesn't know this. Nobody knows it. Right. And so your gut matters. What you put in your body matters. So somebody with good brain health has a good diet and they have good sleep habits.
Okay. So what are some habits or routines that you've taken on since learning more about brains? Yoga, right? And so inverting yourself upside down, believe it or not, even just for short periods a day, or even just, doing traditional yoga poses, it has increased blood flow to the brain, which we've seen to be highly beneficial for people who have cognitive decline. And all cognitive decline starts at 40. So everybody has cognitive decline, right? And the question is like, well, what becomes of that? And does it become, something extraordinary or just ordinary cognitive decline? And of course, extraordinary decline would be something like Alzheimer's. Right. Oh, so interesting. Yoga.
Yeah. Yoga is great. Yeah. Anything that makes your blood flow move is great. So being active is great. But for me, inverted poses, like I like to do headstands on a special headstand chair. So for me, that was different. And then eating superfoods. I mean, there's certain things that are highly beneficial. One of those is, fish oil. Another is avocados. I mean, I really started to understand what are some of the superfoods that actually really feed your brain. And I also started to understand more that cutting out sugar and substituting that with something that's fake is very bad for your brain, right? So like diet soda, diet anything with aspartame is not good for your brain. And so like once I really had an overall analysis of my own brain composition, I gave up Diet Coke entirely. No Diet Coke. If I'm going to drink a Coke, I'm drinking full octane, and I'm not doing it very often.
How interesting. Well, and then lastly, what is one key takeaway that you would like people to walk away from this conversation with about their brain health?
That every brain can be improved, and that 15 functional IQ points are available to everyone, right? And so, and ask yourself, I mean, it was fascinating. I was at a treatment center, and the medical director, who was young and kind of newly out of med school, and we were talking about the benefit of 15 functional IQ points. And then he said, raise your hand if you can't use that. And no one raised their hand, right? Because who can't use a little bit better brain? And we actually have people come for peak performance, not to fix something, especially men. It's fascinating, but it's like men over 60 are very aware that, hey, being sharp and being able to like regurgitate information in a quick and rapid fashion is like part of what healthy aging looks like. And people who sit and think for a long time or can't come up with the word are discriminated against in the workforce. So we have lots of male CEOs. We have some postmenopausal women coming in saying like, I want my 30-year-old brain back. Like, give me that brain. I'm tired of being less than I used to be. So brain restoration is possible. And then also for people who think, oh gosh, I'm stuck in this way that, and I don't know what's wrong, but something's wrong. That's what our Newport Assessment Center is for. And it's not just brain mapping; it's human beings who can say everything from, hey, you need to go to addiction treatment. You need therapeutic boarding school for children. We solve problems, and we use state-of-the-art technology in order to do that. But we solve human problems where people think, I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what to do. Everything starts with their Neurologics brain map.
God, it's so exciting to talk about. I cannot wait to have you back on. I have so many questions that came up during this conversation.
I got so many cool brain things to tell you. So you want to talk about OCD? That would be great.
I would love that. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I had such a great time getting to talk with you.
Me too. So nice meeting you.